Okay, so today I'm going to talk about self-managing your properties and give you some tips and tricks and advice from my perspective. I have been self-managing my long-term rentals for 15 years. I have learned a lot of lessons and several of them the hard way, so hopefully I can save you from that. And I want to start by talking about who should self-manage their properties, because I often wonder to myself, you know, now that I'm in it and I know how to do it, it seems really worthwhile, but I wonder if I should have ever gotten into it in the first place. So for people who are considering it, or maybe they're self-managing a small number of properties right now and they plan to get more, you know, the question is, do you want to continue managing, or is that something that you should hand off to someone else? So the way to think about it, or the way I think about it, is property management is a job. I apologize if my camera's shaking. I have to actually tap my screen to advance my slides. So you're going to get paid or save money in exchange for your time, energy, and expertise. So then the relevant questions for that are, do you have any expertise? Do you know what you're doing? Do you have something to contribute that makes it more efficient for you to do that? Do you have extra time? If you have a full-time job and you enjoy all your time off, do you want to give that up? If you're already, like most people, where you're too busy, do you really need to add something else to your pile? And do you have the energy and desire to do this? You know, you might be on vacation. Do you want to get a phone call that toilet's clogged or things like that? Or would you rather just be able to enjoy your vacation and have someone else handle those things? So, are you an assertive person, and are you comfortable having difficult conversations? If you're a person that avoids conflict, then you're going to get into trouble by not handling things at the time they should be handled, and things getting worse in the long run. When you're first learning, you're definitely going to make mistakes, and they're going to cost you time and cause you stress. So the question is really, is this learning process worthwhile? Are you going to get to the point where you become efficient, and then at that point, the savings, i.e. not paying a property manager, it actually can be a decent return on your time. If you're able to keep your places rented, if you get long-term tenants, you can actually save a decent amount of money, and for the amount of time you put in, it can be fairly good. And then, yeah, sorry, will you get enough benefit to be worth the whole learning process? So a few scenarios that I can see that work where you might want to manage your property is, if you only have a few properties, it might take only a small amount of time and energy, and that's feasible if you have, you know, a full-time job kind of thing, or you're already a busy person. If you have a medium amount of properties, this is really where it gets difficult. I would do this only, say, if you have a part-time job, so you have, you know, a decent amount of time to put towards it. If you have a full-time job and you're trying to manage these properties, you are either going to do a bad job or you are not going to enjoy your life. Or the other scenario where it works, of course, is if you have a large number of properties and you want this to be your primary job. If you are at the point where you have a smaller number of properties now, and maybe you have a full-time job and you want to get to the point where you have a large number of properties, then you got to think about the transition strategy. Getting through the middle part is going to be really difficult, where you're either going to have to quit your job and not have enough income, which is what I did, don't recommend, or you're going to have to somehow figure out how to get the work done while maintaining your job for the time being. And then the main question that sort of I think about a lot is, what could I have done with my time instead? If I hadn't spent so much time managing my properties, what could I have done? Could I have put together more deals? Could I have learned more about different types of investment? Could I have raised more capital to buy more properties? You know, what was the opportunity cost of choosing to manage my own properties? On the flip side of that is, what was the benefit of choosing to manage my own properties? I do think it helped me, especially at the beginning, for raising joint venture money, because I could throw in, I'll manage the properties for X amount of time for free. And so that was a benefit that I brought to the table at a time when I didn't have a lot of experience and wasn't maybe contributing as much of other types of benefits. So I'm going to go over the main aspects of property management. Of course, there's finding tenants, filling vacancies, moving tenants into the property, ongoing work while the tenants are in the property, and then moving tenants out. I'm not really going to cover evictions because I know that this is what really stresses people out, is what if my tenants suck and I have to evict them? But actually shouldn't be that common of a thing that it's worth focusing on. If you do the rest of the steps well, then that will be a very minority of what you spend your time on. Okay, so filling vacancies. The first step is going to be making key decisions about how you want to rent your property. So you're going to identify who is your target tenant. Is it a family? Is it students? Is it, professional adults kind of thing? What are the number of ages? What are the number and ages of people that you would like to live in your property based on the style of property you have, how many bedrooms it has, how much parking it has, and what types and numbers of pets that you would accept in your property, aka the cat issue. And then the other thing you have to do before you're going to advertise your property is determine the rent amount. So how I do this is I go to other rental websites and I look for properties that are listed that are similar to mine, and then I'll make adjustments from their price up or down based on things they have that are more desirable than my property or things that are less desirable. I also adjust for urgency. How quickly do I want to rent this place? So I might try initially renting it for a higher rent, but if I don't get a lot of interest right away, I'll drop the price pretty fast. If you think about it, reducing your rent by $50 and saving 1 month of vacancy, if your rent, $50 a month for a year is $600 in lost revenue, but if you have your place vacant for a whole month, that's going to cost you a lot more than $600. If you drop your rent, you can maybe have a better selection of tenants to choose a better tenant and still save yourself money in the process. Also, if you're paying the utilities for the property, then you want to determine what you're going to charge for utilities. So you'd go back and, if you own this property previously, you would go back and look at your utility costs for the previous year. Or if this is a new property, you might look at utilities for similar properties. The next step is you're going to advertise your properties, and people are going to reply and say, hey, I want to see your property. So I do some pre-screening before I show them the property. And the purpose of this is I don't want to spend my time going to the property if the people are not a good fit for what I want for the property. Also, it's much easier to say no to people when they have invested less in the process. So if you're saying no to them when you're just talking to them by email or on the phone, whatever you're doing, it's a lot easier than having them come to the property and then you feel bad saying no because they might either give you their story or they've invested time to get there and you feel bad about that. So is the number and the age of the people a fit for what you're looking for? Is the number and type of pets a fit? Do they have a reliable source of income? Are they going to be able to predictably pay their rent for their entire tenancy? And can they communicate reasonably well with you? I have had a few people where I literally couldn't have a conversation with them. I have no idea how I would look after them as a tenant when I can't understand what they're saying. Okay, so the next step is obviously show them the property. I'm still, throughout this whole thing, evaluating them to see if I want them as tenants while they're evaluating me to see if they want me as a landlord and if they like my property. So I want to know, are they easy to communicate with to confirm the showing? Do they communicate clearly? Do they arrive on time for their showing? I still regret, this was a lesson I learned the hard way. I had one guy and he told me he was 5 minutes away and he arrived 40 minutes late and he kept just saying, oh, I'm almost there. I'm almost there. And I waited for him and I ended up renting to him and he was just as disrespectful the entire time he lived in my property. So I learned that lesson, how they behave at the beginning is how they're going to behave. So, if they don't respond and at their actual showing time say, hey, I need to reschedule, instead of, telling you way ahead of time, oh, I can't make it tonight, like a normal person would do, then I no longer have any tolerance for that, because it speaks to how they regard you as their landlord. Okay, so after they view the property, of course, if they're interested in renting, they're going to apply to rent. What I take from them, I have an application form that they fill out with all their key information. I collect government photo ID for all of the adults that are going to live there. And that's whether they're going to be on the lease as tenants or whether they're authorized occupants. I do a background check on all of them. And then income confirmation as well. So my preferred method is a pay stub. If they have a regular job that gives them a pay stub, that's the easiest. If not, I get bank statements or other third-party documentation. I don't want to take their word for it. If they're a contractor, I'm not going to take, invoices that they wrote to someone else that I have no idea, unless they can show me a bank deposit for that payment. So I really want to get third-party verification of their income, something that's not just them telling me a story. And then once you have all the information, of course, you're going to review their application. So you're going to I cross-reference everything. I go way into the weeds on this. So you want to know things like, do their pre-screening questions, what you ask them way at the beginning, does that match their application, the information on their application? And does it match anything that they said to you at the showing? Then does their name and birthday on their ID match the application? Does their photo on their ID look like the person who came to see the property? Is their address on their ID showing up on their application as either where they currently live or where they lived recently? You even look at the date that their ID was issued, and does that address that they lived at when their ID was issued match where they said they lived on the application at that time? Then you're going to want to review their income. Again, looking for consistency. So you're going to look at what they said their income was on their application. What does their pay stub or their other third-party information they gave you, what does that say about their income? How long have they worked at the job? Does their pay stub indicate that that information is correct? I mean, often you won't be able to tell, but for example, if they told you they worked there for 5 years and it's August and their most recent pay stub says they made $2,000 and their year-to-date income is $3,000, then what were they doing from January till August? That kind of thing. Do they have enough income to comfortably pay the rent? So obviously you want, if they're overtaxing themselves on the amount of rent, then they're not going to be able to make their payments to you the way that you need. So you want to make sure that you're setting them and yourself up for success and not a future problem. And does their pay stub look legitimate? This is a super good one. So I had somebody apply, sent me their pay stub, and it was a file type that I couldn't open on my computer. So I Googled, how do you open whatever the file type was? And it came up, this file type is an interim file saved by Photoshop. So this person, I don't know, made their pay stub in Photoshop and sent me this interim file. Good job, guy. And then I have a friend also, apparently there are websites where you can go and make a fake pay stub. You can make a draft of it, and then you have to actually pay to get the final product. And this person sent her the draft. It wasn't even, they didn't even pay to send her the thing that looked legitimate. So that's a thing that happens. Watch out for that. I specifically look for things like government deductions and things like that. Usually if you have a paycheck, you've got 150 lines of deductions and vacation pay and all that stuff that, a person making up a pay stub might not know how to create. Then I do a credit check. Again, I'm looking for consistency, cross-referencing their personal information from the credit check. Sometimes it says their employer, or like if they've worked in the same kind of industry, you might see another employer from a similar industry. And then their address history also on their pay stub. If the address was last reported very recently and that doesn't show up anywhere on their application, then, what's the story with that? Review their payment history. Obviously, the ideal thing is that they've paid everything on time always, but that's often not the case. So the things I see most often and sort of mostly disregard is cell phones and cable companies. I'm sure we've all had different experiences with those companies where you get into a dispute with them and, some people would be inclined to walk away from their bill and not pay it. And then their credit looks bad for a long time. But of course, if they have a lot of outstanding things, then, that's definitely a red flag. You want to review their outstanding debts. Do they have a ton of credit and it's all maxed out? And then do they have things like other liabilities like car payments? If they bought a huge expensive vehicle and they have a $900 a month car payment, how does that factor into their ability to pay rent? And then reference calls. So you're going to call their landlords, current and previous, and their employers. I like to snoop on these things too. I try to determine if the information it provided is legitimate. So I will do things like Google the phone number that they gave me, Google the name of the person they gave me, or go to the company website and look at the employee directory to see if that person actually works there. Also recommending for employers, call the main phone number for the company instead of calling a cell phone number if they give you one. If the person legitimately works there, you're going to get an answer like, oh, so-and-so's not in the office today. Can I take a message or something? In which case you can hang up and call the phone number. At least you've confirmed that the person actually works there. And there's not just like, hey, my friend Joe is going to pretend I work for him. And then the questions I ask to landlords and employers are questions that are targeted to find out is the person friendly and easy to get along with? Are they reliable? Do they do what they say they're going to do? That includes for landlords like taking care of the property. And then of course for employment, we know includes showing up for work and doing a good job. And then I ask them if they would choose to either rent to them again or hire them again. Okay, so once you've approved a tenant, you're going to get them moved in. So part of the process is, of course, having a rental agreement. So this document actually guides the relationship you're going to have with your tenants. It sets the tone for, that expression, good fences make good neighbors. I would say good rental agreements make good tenancy relationships. So make sure your rental agreement is in plain language. I want my tenants to understand my expectations of them so that they can follow them. If I send them a document that's in legal gibberish with heretofores and notwithstandings and whatever, they're not going to understand what they need to do. And I want them to do what they're supposed to do. So I want them to understand. I only do fixed term leases. The reason is because when the fixed term expires, if things are not going well in the rental with the tenancy, you can say, I'm not renewing your lease. You need to move out at the end of the month. And that gives you a nice, easy way to end the tenancy without any fight. If you have a periodic tenancy, I'm going to say the lazy way, because you don't have to go through the effort of signing a new lease every year. But if you have a periodic tenancy and the relationship's kind of irking you, something's not going right. I had a tenant that was just argumentative and difficult. And every time I had to deal with him, it just irritated the crap out of me. And I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I just said at the end of the lease, sorry, your lease is not being renewed. In my mind, my life is too short to deal with this. I want out. But I would have never been able to take him to court and terminate his lease just based on that he didn't do anything substantially wrong. So the fixed term lease gave me the option to make that decision when I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Your lease should be a work in progress. It should be something that you continuously improve. Whenever you end up in a difficult situation where there was something the tenant did that you couldn't respond to properly, or something the tenant did that you wanted to specify that nobody should ever do again, then you should modify your lease to include a method for you to deal with that, or to tell future tenants not to do that thing. So some examples of this are, I had a tenant and they were from another country, and then they lived in a townhouse before they moved into my detached house. And they were under the impression that they did not have to cut the grass. So even in spite of me very clearly informing them that they had to cut the grass, they didn't do it. And I called the landlord and tenant advisory board to get advice on what can I do? They're not cutting the grass. It's up to my knees. And they said, well, what does your lease say? And my lease didn't say anything about it. So sure enough, after that situation ended, I added to my lease, if you don't maintain the lawn, I can hire someone to take care of it and bill it to you. So that's an example of a scenario where you could make your life easier in the future by learning from a situation. And then I always give the tenant time to review the lease in detail before they sign it. My lease is 9 pages long. If anybody ever presented me a document and said, here, sign this, and didn't give me a chance to read it, I would not be happy at all. So I wouldn't treat anyone like that. I send it to them like for electronic signing way before they move in. They get time to read, do all the reading they want, ask questions about it, etc. And then they can sign it once they're good with everything. And I want them to read it also. So on the day that they're moving in, you're going to do a written inspection with them. I like to have this all filled out ahead of time, because it's really awkward to walk around with the tenant and say, how do the walls look? How does the ceiling look? It makes me feel rushed, and then I'm bound to miss things. And I think it's just, not a good use of the tenant's time either. So I fill everything out ahead of time. I take photos. I take a general photo of each room, like the whole room from far away, so you can see everything. And then if there's any deficiencies that I'm writing down, I'll take a close-up picture of the deficiency, and I'll put something in the photo to show the scale. So is it, how big is the item? And then you want to be very specific, like there's a hole in the north wall that's 3 centimeters across or whatever, right? So that, you don't just write there's a hole in the wall, and then when they move out, there's a hole the size of a foot. And, when they moved in, there was a hole the size of a dime, something like that. And then the other thing I do at their move-in inspection is I give them other important information. So I'm telling them things like reviewing their responsibilities, making sure they understand about the lawn and snow. I tell them the hours for moving in. So if you're in a place where you have neighbors, I have suited rentals, or you might be in a condo, for example. I say moving in between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Again, I had to add this in my instructions because I had some tenant moving stuff in at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the tenants in the opposite suite were obviously not very happy with that. What goes down the toilet? Like having the drain of the house plugged is the worst thing ever. So I tell them, only toilet paper and human waste down the toilet. To me, that's a key message I need to tell them from the beginning. And then I tell them why, because you can't use the water, blah, blah, blah. So whatever you're telling them, give them a reason. And it all sounds very logical when you say the statement with the reason. They're like, oh yeah, totally, no problem. I show them where all the water shutoffs are so that if there's ever a leak, they can turn it off quickly and not have it cause further damage to the property. And then I set expectations for contacting you. I say, I'm a real person. I like to have evenings and weekends off too. I like to not be interrupted when I don't have to be. So, if it's not urgent after hours, I won't be getting back to you until the next business day. If it is urgent, call, text, email, blow up my phone. I will respond to it. And then I also tell them, for maintenance and repairs, the best thing to do is email me, because then it's not like a text. You don't just see it. You know how it is with text. You see it, you read it, then you totally forget about it. It doesn't get done, whereas email sits there until I deal with it. So then once they're moved in, there's some ongoing work at the property. Your responsibility is to fulfill your obligations in the lease. The tenants are basically like customers of your business, and they're buying your product, i.e. renting your place, in exchange for you maintaining the property. So things you want to do: regular property inspections, make sure the tenants aren't damaging something, and make sure there isn't something that needs attention that's getting worse because it needs to be resolved. Routine maintenance, so things like a million things. And then part of routine maintenance, whenever we're going to do maintenance, I always ask the tenants, hey, have you noticed anything that needs attention? That way you can, provide good customer service, fix something that's annoying them, and also while you're there already with all your tools and things. Anything that breaks, you want to complete the repair in a timely way. I'm sure at your house, if the washing machine broke, you wouldn't be very happy if you didn't get it fixed for 3 months. You can't expect your tenants to want to stay living with you if you don't have respect for what you're supposed to provide to them. And then you want to review your financials regularly, especially utility usage. And obviously if you're paying for the utilities. And this has gotten even more important recently with utility costs going up, because the more they use, or when there's wastage, like a running toilet or something, the cost is higher. It's going to get even more proportionately huge. I know a lot of investors that literally just put their stuff in a shoebox and send it to the accountant at the end of the year. Well, if your toilet's running, that could be a huge amount of extra water cost, and you're not gonna, will you even notice from your accountant? But, you wanna be on top of that so you can go resolve the problem quickly. And then part of your work is lease renewals. So I always want to offer these about a month and a half before the tenant moves out. I go through the same process of reviewing market rents and utility costs, and then I offer it to the tenants and give them maybe a week to decide if they want to renew or not. And that way, if they don't want to renew, I know well in advance that they're moving out. I can get prepared to advertise the property and start showing it on day 1 of the last month. And then the last thing is, of course, your tenants are going to move out at some point. So hopefully you've had a really thorough move-in inspection, so you know exactly the condition when they moved in. I like to go through my photos ahead of time and look at the list ahead of time as well. And then I communicate expectations in advance. So I'll send them an email, hey, you're moving out, we're going to show your property, here's how that's going to work, and here's a checklist of stuff you need to do to get your full security deposit back. So that's like, make sure all the light bulbs are working, make sure you clean under the stove and fridge, a whole list of things like that. Before I do again, complete the inspection before they arrive. If their move out appointment's at 3 p.m., I'll arrive at 2 p.m. to do the inspection so that I have lots of time and am not rushed again. Take lots of photos again. Tenants will try and talk you into, they'll give you a thing, oh, I didn't do that. That was like that when I moved in, or they'll try and get you to tell them what you're going to charge for it at the time on the spot. It's really bad idea to do that. You'll often end up regretting what you said. And then set their expectations for when they're going to receive their statement and check. And then you are back to the beginning of renting. I guess in the middle, you're going to fix up any deficiencies, and then you're back to the beginning of filling a vacancy again. So I don't know if we have time for any questions. That is my email address if anybody wants to contact me. And thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shanna. Amazing presentation and so many great points. Especially the focus on the Rental Tenancy Act. I think we often don't really realize some of the things that are in it. And like that you brought up RTDRS and being able to use them as a resource sometimes. Just things like running water, right? Like if your toilet's running in the increase of cost, and just things that we sometimes as landlords forget about and don't question.